Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Chris Dost, and I'm so happy to be here with you today to launch our new series, What is the Bible? In this series, we're going to talk about everything from the original Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew, to the Dead Sea Scrolls, to ancient translations of the Bible, ancient interpretations of the Bible, modern translations, and any questions that you might have. But before we get into our introductory talk, please hit the subscribe button so that you can be notified when videos like this appear in the future. All right, let's get started. So what is the Bible? Well, I want to start our discussion by talking about the contents of the Bible. Now, before we get to the Christian Bible, we have to start with the Jewish Bible, because the Jewish Bible makes up the first division of the Christian Bible. The Jewish Bible is identical in content to the Christian Old Testament, as it's often called. Sometimes you'll hear me refer to it as the Hebrew Scriptures for various reasons. I'll get into that some other time. So what is the Jewish Bible? Well, the Jewish Bible is often called the Tanakh. Tanakh. The T in Tanakh is for the Hebrew term Torah. Torah, which is often translated as law, but really means instruction. The first 5 books of the Tanakh make up the Torah, and they are the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Genesis deals with stories of creation, Adam and Eve, the flood, and the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob's sons. The book of Exodus deals with the captivity of the Hebrews in Egypt, their liberation under Moses, and then the second half of the book of Exodus deals with the 10 Commandments and various laws that are given by God to the Israelites or the Hebrews through Moses while they are in the wilderness of Sinai. The books of Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy also take place before Israel enters what's known as the Promised Land, the land of Canaan. So these 5 books make up the Torah. Torah. And again, I said it's best not to translate Torah as law, because these 5 books don't just deal with laws. They contain a lot of stories that the New Testament even says is written for the purpose of instruction. And that really is the meaning of the word Torah. In fact, Torah is related to the Hebrew word for teacher, moreh in the masculine and morah in the feminine. Hopefully you can hear that relationship, moreh and morah. If you're interested in learning about Hebrew, be sure to check out my Introducing Hebrew playlist on this channel. So the T in Tanakh is for Torah, the N is for Nevi'im. Nevi'im is the Hebrew word for the prophets. Now, when I talk about the prophets, many Christians will think of what are known as the latter prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then the minor prophets, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, etc. The latter prophets are only part of the book of the prophets in the Nevi'im. In Jewish tradition, the books of Joshua, Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings are actually considered prophetic books. While these books deal with historical issues, you might think of them more as a prophetic view of history, a prophetic view of history. So we have the Torah, we have the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im are broken up into 2 parts, the former prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, and the latter prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the book of the 12 minor prophets. Now, Christians will want to note that the book of Daniel is not listed among the 12 minor prophets, and I'll talk about why in a future lesson. All right, the K in Tanakh is for Ketuvim. Ketuvim is the Hebrew word for writings. The section known as the writings includes everything that is not Torah and Nevi'im, and therefore is kind of a catch-all. The order of the books of the Ketuvim will vary in different manuscripts. A common order is Chronicles, Psalms, Job, Proverbs, Ruth, Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, you may know it as, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, Esther, Daniel, and the book of Ezra, Nehemiah. Now, traditionally, the Protestant Christian Bible is composed of the Old Testament, or the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Scriptures. It can be known by all of these different names, as well as the New Testament. Now, the New Testament begins with 4 books known as the Gospels. The Gospels are concerned with the Euangelion, the good news that Jesus preaches. And these books are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I've added the book of Acts here, even though it's not technically considered a gospel. It really is part 2 to the Gospel of Luke, and therefore I've just kind of lumped it in because there is no other work in the New Testament akin to it outside of the Gospels. The second part of the New Testament is known as the Pauline epistles, And this includes Paul's letters to the Romans, the Corinthians, the Galatians, and you can read the rest of the list for yourself there. Some letters are longer, some letters are very short. They range in size, but they generally deal with major issues facing the early church. Then we have the book of Hebrews and other general epistles. Now remember, epistle is just another word for a letter. So when we read Hebrews, the general epistles, and the Pauline epistles, we're really reading the mail of the ancient church. So what are the general epistles? The general epistles are known as James, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Jude. And then finally, the New Testament closes off with the book of Revelation. Revelation is an apocalypse. It's a Jewish apocalypse. And an apocalypse is a book that, yes, it talks about end times issues, but it's really focused on God intervening in human history. This is a very common genre of Jewish religious literature in the centuries leading up to and following the life of Jesus. So we have the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Protestant Christian Bible. But interestingly, in the original King James Bible, and many people who are listening to this are probably King James readers, the King James originally consisted of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Tanakh, the New Testament, but also the Apocrypha. This raises a very interesting issue because many people today who read the King James Bible do not believe that the Apocrypha is sacred scripture. And the Apocrypha has been removed from later editions of the King James Bible. That's going to be an issue that we come back to at a later date. But the Apocrypha, the corpus of literature known as the Apocrypha, is also known as deuterocanonical literature because it is not considered to be sacred scripture by some groups and some individuals in the same way that the Old Testament and New Testament is. So what is the Apocrypha? Well, the Apocrypha is a corpus of literature that was given canonical or quasi-canonical status in Judaism and in early Christianity. And you can see the list of works that are included there. In fact, some people listening to this may actually have these books in their Bibles. Now, what's interesting is that whether you consider the Apocrypha to be sacred scripture or not, in the earliest centuries of the church, the first Bibles that we actually have, which come from the 4th century and the 5th century, I give you one example here. This is the earliest Christian Bible. This is Codex Sinaiticus from the 4th century. And Codex Sinaiticus, which is written in Greek, as you can see here, includes the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It includes the books of the former prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. You'll notice that Ruth is inserted here. Other historical books like 1st and 2nd Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah. But then you have, after Esther, the books of Tobit and Judith, 1st through 4th Maccabees, before you come to the prophets, the latter prophets, as it were, Isaiah, before you come to the major and minor prophets and Lamentations and the other poetry books. And then even in the poetry books, we get Wisdom and Sirach, which are not part of the Jewish Bible and not part of the Protestant Old Testament today. Now, it's fascinating that in other ancient manuscripts from the time of Codex Sinaiticus, they don't agree exactly on what the contents of the Bible should be. And we'll talk about that in another video when we look at ancient manuscripts of the Bible. But for now, it's important to note that the Bible of the 4th century Christian church was still determining the exact contents of the Bible, and we see evidence of that here. So the 1611 King James Bible includes the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Apocrypha. And this is true of the Roman Catholic Bible. The Ethiopian Bible, interestingly enough, includes the Old Testament, the New Testament, some works of the Apocrypha, as well as other disputed works, such as the Book of Enoch, and some other less familiar works. So this raises the question, which Bible is the Bible? Well, we're not going to solve that issue today, but I want to whet your appetite for what we're going to be talking about in future lessons. Before we can determine what the Bible is and what the Bible is not in terms of contents, we're going to have to look at issues of dating and authorship. When were these texts written? By whom were they written? We have to consider the transmission history. When the original versions of the various books of the Bible were written down, how were they passed on to us? Then we have the question of canonicity. Canonicity is the question of which books should truly be regarded as sacred scripture. Jews and Christians have disagreed even with one another on these issues over the years, both internally and externally. And finally, we'll have to deal with the issue of translations. Why do certain translations include some books and not others? And why do some translations add or remove verses and chapters from books of the Bible that are found in other translations? Well, these are just some of the issues that we're going to be talking about in this course, What is the Bible? If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button so that you are notified when I publish videos like this. Take care, everybody.